The pattern you keep repeating. Have you ever stopped, really stopped, and asked yourself, why do people treat me this way? Not as a passing thought while you scroll through your phone at midnight, not as a vague frustration that dissolves after a good meal or a distraction, but as a real, unflinching question you sit with until the discomfort becomes undeniable. Why do they cut you off mid-sentence as though what you were saying didn't matter enough to finish? Why do they remember everyone else's names, plans, and birthdays, but yours somehow slip through the cracks every time? Why do they laugh at the things you take seriously, your sensitivity, your values, your choices, as if these are quirks to be tolerated rather than parts of a real person to be respected? Or worse, why do they use you? They appear when they need something, a favor, emotional support, a connection you can offer. And then, when the usefulness passes, they vanish without a word, not even the courtesy of an explanation, as though you were a tool they borrowed and left on the shelf. Maybe you recognize yourself in this. Maybe you are the person who is always available, even on your worst days. When exhaustion has hollowed you out from the inside, you say yes. You answer the call. You show up. Because somewhere, embedded in the architecture of how you move through the world, is the belief that saying no is dangerous. You stay quiet when someone crosses a line. Not because you didn't notice, but because you are terrified of what happens if you speak. Will they get angry? Will they leave? Will they decide you are too much to deal with? You forgive before the other person has even apologized, sometimes before they've even noticed they caused harm. You absorb the impact, smooth it over, and move forward because keeping the peace feels safer than demanding honesty. And what do you get in return? Dismissal, indifference, silence where warmth should be. And the worst part, the part that is hardest to admit, is that deep down, you already know you're not being respected. You can feel it. It lives in your body as a low, persistent ache. But you don't know how to break the cycle, and so you keep going. You keep being understanding, keep being patient, keep being endlessly available. Maybe one day you tell yourself people will finally recognize your value. But that day never quite arrives. Carl Jung, one of the most profound psychologists of the modern era, once observed, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Perhaps this is exactly why the cycle never breaks, because self-respect demands something deeply frightening. You must turn inward and take honest ownership of your role in what is happening to you. You must look clearly at the part of yourself that has silently agreed to these dynamics, and understand that as long as you continue to dismiss yourself, the world will follow your lead. This is not a video that will offer you comfortable scripts or position you as a helpless victim of other people's cruelty. What you will find here is something rarer and more valuable, the source of the problem, and it is closer than you expect. If you are exhausted by the disrespect you experience, from friends, family, partners, colleagues, then it is time to understand why it keeps happening. It is time to take back control of your emotional life. Here, we will go deep into Jungian psychology, explore why you tolerate what should be intolerable, and map out how you can change this permanently. Because as long as you continue to betray yourself, no one else will respect you either. Are you ready to hear what you haven't dared to tell yourself? Let me tell you about Marcus. Marcus is 38 years old. He lives in Toronto, works as a senior project manager at a mid-sized tech company, and by the surface metrics of modern success, he is doing well. His apartment is clean and well-furnished. He earns a respectable salary. He has a wide social circle. But here is what Marcus carries quietly, never sharing it with the people who fill his weekends. At work, his ideas get implemented, but not under his name. He drafts proposals, suggests strategies, spends late evenings refining plans. His manager presents these ideas in leadership meetings and receives the credit. Marcus tells himself this is just how organizations work. He stays quiet. He adjusts. In his friendships, he is the reliable one. The person everyone calls when they need to move apartments, when they need someone to listen to a crisis at 2 in the morning, when they need someone to show up. But when Marcus went through a rough stretch last winter, a difficult breakup, a period of real professional doubt, the messages he sent went unread for days. The friends he had always been there for suddenly became mysteriously unavailable. In his romantic relationships, a pattern has emerged that Marcus is only beginning to recognize. He gives everything at the start: attention, care, effort, presence, and gradually the dynamic shifts. His partners begin to take him for granted. They grow distant, then dismissive. And Marcus, instead of addressing it, instead of standing in his own worth, begins to try harder. He becomes more accommodating, more available, more eager to please. His last relationship ended when his partner told him with startling bluntness, "You don't have a backbone, Marcus. I never knew what you actually wanted. You just agreed with everything I said." He was devastated, but the most honest part of him knew she was right. Here is the uncomfortable truth that the world doesn't often say directly. The world around you is not as chaotic as it appears. It is, in many ways, a precise and ruthless mirror of how you relate to yourself. Very few people are willing to accept this. The reason people treat you the way they do is not simply because they are thoughtless, selfish, or emotionally underdeveloped, though some of them may be all of these things. The part you do not want to accept is this: they are responding to how you position yourself, or more precisely, to the absence of any real positioning at all. Because every time you stay silent in the face of an injustice, every time you accept treatment that diminishes you, every time you swallow what should have been said, you are sending the world a message. And that message is, this is how I see myself. This is what I believe I deserve. Jung writes that outer reality functions as a mirror of the unconscious. The disrespect you experience, the rejections that sting long after they should have faded, the silences that carve wounds in you. These are not random events. They are, in many cases, symbolic reflections of the parts of yourself you have suppressed, denied, or failed to fully recognize. As long as you do not see your own worth, as long as you project an image built on self-doubt and the desperate need for external validation, the world receives that fragile, uncertain signal, and it responds accordingly. But before we go any further, something must be said clearly. This is not about blame. It is about awakening. Because the silent agreements you have made with yourself, the ones that opened the door to disrespect, did not begin with a deliberate choice. They were learned, absorbed from the environment around you long before you had the awareness to question them. Perhaps as a child growing up in a home where love felt conditional, you learned that being good, being quiet, obedient, agreeable, was the price of belonging. Perhaps you learned that expressing your needs made you a burden, that having limits made you difficult, that being loved required you to make yourself small. And so you shrank, and kept shrinking. Now, as an adult, those old scripts still run quietly in the background, directing your every choice, shaping every relationship, governing every word you swallow. The silent belief that your worth is contingent on other people's approval has spread into every corner of your life. You position yourself as lesser, not out of malice, but out of habit, a deep, unconscious, long-reinforced habit. And until you bring this into the light of conscious awareness, the cycle will not end. You can move to a new city, change your job, walk away from one relationship, and enter another. But the pattern will follow you, because the pattern does not live in your circumstances. It lives in you. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Until you confront how you see yourself, you will keep living the same invisibility. You will attract not what you desire, but what you believe, deep down, you are entitled to receive." But there is a way out, and it begins in the most uncomfortable place you can imagine, not by looking outward and demanding different treatment, but by turning inward and starting to build something real. And this leads us to the question almost no one dares to ask, but which determines the entire direction of your emotional life. Why are you still trying to prove your value to other people? In the next part, we will face the trap that swallows so many good, intelligent, deeply feeling people, and we will begin the real work of getting out. The approval trap, and why it always fails. Throughout your life, you have been working to prove something, not always consciously, not always openly, but somewhere beneath the choices you make and the way you show up in the world, there has been a relentless, exhausting, invisible campaign to demonstrate that you are enough, to be the perfect child, the flawless employee, the friend who never disappoints, the partner who anticipates every need, to bend, to adjust, to reshape yourself, to fit whatever the moment or the person in front of you seemed to demand. And what has it earned you? Moments of approval, temporary relief, the fleeting warmth of someone's satisfaction before it evaporates and the proving starts again, but never, not once, the deep and enduring respect you were searching for. This is what we might call the approval trap. It is one of the most widespread and least examined sources of human suffering, and it operates on a logic that feels perfectly reasonable from the inside, even while it quietly destroys you. Consider Elena. Elena is 41, originally from Lisbon, now living in Amsterdam, where she works as a brand strategist for an international consultancy. She is sharp, perceptive, and genuinely talented. Her colleagues respect her work. Her clients recommend her. But Elena has spent the better part of 2 decades managing the image she presents to the world with an exhausting precision. She dresses carefully, not for herself, but to preempt criticism. She prepares excessively for meetings, not because she lacks confidence in her knowledge, but because she is terrified of a moment's pause in which someone might think less of her. She laughs when things aren't funny. She agrees when she disagrees. She waters down her opinions until they are palatable to everyone and nourishing to no one. At a conference in Berlin last spring, she sat in a panel discussion and watched a colleague present an idea that she had first raised tentatively, carefully, with all her characteristic hedging, in a meeting 3 weeks earlier. The colleague presented it boldly, directly, with full conviction. The room responded with energy and enthusiasm. Afterward, a senior partner at the firm stopped Elena in the corridor. "That was great thinking from David," the partner said, smiling. "I love that guy's confidence." Elena smiled and nodded, and then she walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the sink for several minutes, trying to understand why she kept disappearing. Carl Jung gave us a concept that helps explain exactly what was happening to Elena, to Marcus, and very possibly to you. He called it the persona. The persona is the mask we wear for public consumption, the version of ourselves we construct to meet the expectations of the social world. It is, in its proper place, a necessary tool. We all modulate ourselves depending on context. There is nothing pathological about presenting differently to your employer than you do to your closest friend. The danger comes when you lose yourself inside the mask. When the persona becomes your primary identity, when the performance of acceptability replaces the experience of authenticity, something essential erodes. You become what Jung described as a gentle ghost, endlessly agreeable, universally pleasant, and secretly respected by no one, including yourself. The desire to belong is not the problem. It is a deeply human need, ancient and legitimate. The problem emerges when that desire becomes the compass by which your entire identity is navigated. When you begin evaluating yourself through other people's reactions, when a single compliment can elevate you and a single criticism can level you, you become a hostage to external approval. You exhaust yourself trying to be useful, indispensable, irreplaceable, because somewhere in the calculus of your unconscious, you have concluded, only if I am perfect will I be safe. But the ruthless truth is this: the more you work to prove your worth, the more loudly you announce to the world that you don't believe in it. A person who genuinely respects themselves does not beg for attention, does not perform kindness in exchange for love, does not shrink or swell depending on who is in the room. They know who they are, and that knowledge is enough. They do not sacrifice themselves to be seen. They do not erase themselves to be loved. They are not afraid of causing discomfort, because they understand that sometimes discomfort is the honest price of an authentic life. But reaching this place requires demolishing a belief most of us have held for decades: I must earn other people's respect. No, you don't. What you actually need to do is rebuild the respect you hold for yourself. The respect you may have lost years ago, or perhaps never fully developed in the first place. Once that foundation is real and solid, other people's gaze stops being a threat. It becomes exactly what it is: a reflection. Nothing more. And that shift, from performing your worth to inhabiting it, begins with a single, simple, and terrifying choice: saying no. In the next part, we will talk about why boundaries feel so impossible, and why they are the single most transformative act of self-respect available to you. The word that changes everything. Someone told you at some point in your life that being a good person meant never pushing back. Not in those words, necessarily. Perhaps it was more subtle than that. Perhaps it was the way love was withdrawn when you expressed frustration as a child, the way conflict was treated as catastrophe in your household, the way the adults around you modeled self-sacrifice as a virtue so absolute that having needs of your own seemed like a moral failure, and so you absorbed the lesson. Caring for yourself is selfishness. Having limits is coldness. Protecting your energy is ingratitude. This is why every time you attempted to say no, to decline a request, to remove yourself from a draining dynamic, to hold the line on something that mattered to you, guilt moved in immediately, not as a whisper, as a flood. The guilt corroded your resolve. It made you doubt your own clarity, and slowly it pulled you back into the pattern, agreeing to things you resented, accepting treatment you found demeaning, maintaining a peace that was actually just a well-maintained submission. But here is what no one says clearly enough. The world does not give respect to those who do not respect themselves, and self-respect is not asked for. It is not negotiated, it is not gently suggested, it is demonstrated. And that demonstration does not require aggression or anger or a dramatic confrontation. It requires clarity, consistency, and the willingness to be uncomfortable. James worked at a financial services company in London for 11 years. He was diligent, conscientious, and, in his own quiet way, brilliant at his work. He was also the person in the office who never said no. Overtime? Of course. Last-minute requests on a Friday afternoon? Absolutely. covering for colleagues during their holidays while his own vacation days went unused, without complaint. His manager, a sharp, instinctive woman named Claire, had noticed the pattern years ago. She did not think of James as a pushover in cruel terms. She thought of him as reliable. But in the private language of professional environments, that reliability had a shadow. James would always absorb whatever was asked of him, so whatever was excessive would naturally migrate toward him. When a senior analyst position opened up, James was passed over for a younger colleague who had been at the company for 3 years. He was told in the feedback conversation that he was valuable in his current role. That night, James sat in his flat in Hackney and understood something for the first time. Being available had not made him respected. It had made him invisible. Indispensable in the way a piece of furniture is indispensable, useful, necessary, and never truly seen. 3 months later, James started saying no. Not dramatically, not with a list of complaints or an ultimatum, simply and clearly, "I won't be able to take that on this week. That timeline doesn't work for me. I need to leave at 6 today." Something shifted. His manager, initially surprised, began to take his assessments more seriously. His colleagues, no longer able to default to him for overflow, stopped treating his time as a shared resource. And James himself, for the first time in over a decade, began to feel that he occupied a real place in the room. The word no is the first concrete act of self-respect. When you say it, genuinely, calmly, without elaborate justification, you send a message to the world and to yourself. My time has value. My energy is not for sale. My well-being matters. I have limits, and those limits are not a weakness to be apologized for. But to reach this place, you must first untangle something that has been coiled around your capacity for self-protection for a very long time. Jung described the individuation process, the journey toward becoming fully and authentically oneself, as one that necessarily involves conflict. And the first conflict is with the internal version of yourself that has survived for years by saying yes to everything. That inner voice is still whispering to you. If I please them, they will keep me. If I make myself useful enough, they will never leave. If I have no edges, no friction, no demands, maybe then I will finally be safe. But this safety comes at a catastrophic cost. The loss of yourself, the slow erosion of your dignity, the abandonment of your own interiority in exchange for a peace that is, in truth, only a sustained performance of surrender. Do you want to be respected? Then begin saying no, where once you always said yes. Decline the requests that drain you. Remove yourself from relationships that take without giving. Turn down invitations you accepted only out of guilt. And observe something important. The people who become most disturbed by your new clarity are, almost always, the ones who have been benefiting most from your absence of limits. This will hurt. There will be discomfort on both sides, but this discomfort is not something to be avoided. It is the necessary friction of a life being reclaimed. Every time you say no, you are saying yes to something far more important. You are saying yes to your own authority, to your own voice, to the possibility of a life in which you are the one holding the reins. But there is a deeper layer beneath the inability to set limits, a layer that hides in a part of yourself you have been carefully avoiding. Jung named it the shadow. And in the next part, we go there. The shadow. Meeting the self. You buried. There is a part of you that you have never fully introduced yourself to. It is not the version of you that appears in your profile photo, or the one who speaks in meetings, or the one who texts friends warmly and turns up reliably for other people's celebrations. It is the version of you that holds everything you decided or were taught was unacceptable. Your anger, your hunger for recognition, your refusal to be overlooked, your assertiveness, your willingness to disappoint. Jung called this the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is simply everything that did not fit the version of yourself you were allowed or expected to be. In childhood, some traits were rewarded and others were punished, explicitly or through the withdrawal of warmth and approval. And so you separated. You kept the parts of yourself that were welcomed, and you buried everything else. But buried things do not vanish. They go underground, and from there they continue to run your life. They govern the moments when you freeze instead of speak, when you apologize for things that are not your fault. When something crosses a line and instead of responding clearly, a familiar voice inside you whispers, "Let it go. Don't make a scene. This isn't worth the trouble." Those are not the words of wisdom. Those are the words of a child who learned that self-protection was dangerous. Aisha grew up in Nairobi in a family that valued harmony above almost everything. Her mother was a gentle and deeply loving woman who had never once, in Aisha's memory, raised her voice. Conflict was avoided through redirection, through humor, through the quiet absorption of discomfort. To make a scene was the household's greatest social sin. To demand something directly was considered aggressive, and aggression was considered a character defect. By the time Aisha was in her mid-20s, she had internalized all of this so thoroughly that she could not distinguish between genuine peace and performed peace. She had never learned to tell the difference between choosing not to engage because she had truly processed something and staying quiet because speaking felt too frightening. She moved to London for work, and the years that followed carried a recurring theme. Managers who took credit for her analysis, romantic partners who made decisions for them both without consultation, friends who joked at her expense in ways she found genuinely hurtful but laughed along with, because the alternative, saying, "That's not okay," felt insurmountable. At 31, she began therapy. In one of her early sessions, her therapist asked a question she had never considered. "What would you say if you were not afraid of the consequences?" Aisha sat with the question for a long time, and when she finally spoke, what came out was not polished. It was raw and uneven and far more honest than anything she had said out loud in years. She realized in that session that she had a shadow full of words she had never permitted herself to say. And that shadow, unfed, unacknowledged, denied, had been quietly sabotaging her life. Jung wrote, "The things that are not brought to consciousness appear in our lives as fate." Think about how many times you wanted to speak but didn't. How many times you absorbed a wound in silence rather than name it. How many times someone crossed a clear boundary and you stood there, smiling, feeling hollowed out, and then told yourself this was maturity. It wasn't maturity. It was the shape that powerlessness takes when it wears respectable clothes. Your shadow does not want you to be cruel or aggressive. It wants you to be whole. It wants you to recover the parts of yourself that were deemed too much or too inconvenient, and integrate them into a complete, coherent self. Your anger, properly inhabited, is not a weapon. It is information. It is your nervous system telling you that something has gone wrong, that a boundary has been violated, that your dignity has been disregarded, that a situation requires your voice. Your desire for recognition is not vanity. It is the natural human need to be genuinely seen, not for a performance, but for who you actually are. Your self-protective instincts are not selfishness, they are sanity. Reclaiming your shadow does not mean becoming someone difficult or reactive. It means becoming someone integrated, someone who contains the full range of what it means to be human, rather than only the safe, acceptable, socially rewarded portion of it. And once you begin this reclamation, slowly, carefully, with awareness, something remarkable starts to happen. You stop needing to be liked by everyone. You stop shrinking to fit the preferences of people who have never truly seen you. You stop giving away the things that keep you whole. And in the space that opens up when you stop performing yourself and start being yourself, real respect becomes possible. Not the kind that is squeezed out of others by relentless niceness. The kind that arises naturally in the presence of someone who knows exactly who they are. But we are not done, because there is one final chain still binding you, and it may be the strongest of all. The fear of being alone, 5 practices that rebuild self-respect, and the final liberation. Before we talk about the 5 practices, and we will in specific and actionable terms, there is something that must be named, because you cannot truly move forward until you have faced the thing that has been quietly anchoring you in place. It is the fear of ending up alone. This fear is the engine behind almost every self-betrayal you have committed. It is why you stayed in the friendship that slowly drained you, why you kept quiet in the relationship that was slowly diminishing you, why you stayed in the job where your contributions were taken for granted rather than risking the vulnerability of demanding something better. Better something than nothing, you told yourself, even if the something is hurting me. Daniel is 45, a physician in Melbourne. He spent 14 years in a marriage that had ceased to feel like a partnership and had slowly become something more closely resembling an arrangement, civil, functional, and utterly hollow. His wife did not disrespect him overtly. She simply stopped seeing him. She had her world, he had his. They shared a home and raised 2 children and attended social events and presented from the outside as a stable and successful couple. But Daniel had not been genuinely heard in years. Not about his doubts, his quiet despairs, the loneliness of being surrounded by people and still feeling profoundly unseen. When he occasionally tried to raise this, his wife would sigh and ask what he expected her to do about it. And Daniel, terrified of the answer, would retreat. Because what he could not face was the possibility that if he asked for what he actually needed, real presence, real intimacy, real regard, she might simply say, "I can't give you that." And then what? He would be alone, truly alone, not the quiet solitude of a night in, but the raw, structural aloneness of a life rebuilt from scratch. So he stayed, and in staying, accepted a life that was half the size of what he was capable of living. This is what emotional dependency does. It makes the fear of absence so overwhelming that the presence of diminishment feels preferable. It makes other people's proximity a necessity rather than a choice. And when something is a necessity, you will pay any price to keep it, including the price of your own dignity. But here is what the fear conceals from you. The person who has learned to be genuinely comfortable in their own company is the only person capable of making a truly free choice about who belongs in their life. Because when connection is a desire rather than an emergency, everything changes. You choose people for the right reasons. You stay in relationships for the right reasons. And, perhaps most powerfully, you are capable of recognizing when something is over and letting it go without collapsing. The capacity to be alone is not the opposite of connection. It is its prerequisite. And now, the 5 practices. These are not abstract principles. They are concrete, daily actions. Small shifts in behavior that, practiced consistently over time, rebuild the internal architecture of self-respect from the ground up. Practice 1. Use discomfort as a compass. When something makes you uncomfortable, when an interaction leaves you feeling smaller than you arrived, when a request pulls at something in your gut, do not immediately search for reasons to dismiss that feeling. Do not rush to the defense of the other person or manufacture excuses or tell yourself you're being oversensitive. Stop and ask yourself one honest question. If I genuinely respected myself right now, what would I do? Maybe the answer is to end the conversation. Maybe it is to say something clearly and calmly. Maybe it is to decline something you would previously have accepted automatically. Whatever the answer is, do that. Discomfort is not the enemy. Discomfort, read correctly, is your most reliable internal guide. Practice 2. Stop explaining yourself. Excessively, when you say no, you do not owe anyone a detailed accounting of your reasons. 3 paragraphs of explanation before a refusal signal guilt and insecurity. They communicate, I am aware that my refusal is an imposition, and I am preemptively apologizing for it. You are allowed to say, that doesn't work for me. I won't be able to do that. This isn't something I'm comfortable with. Full stop. A person who respects themselves does not perform their boundaries. They state them clearly and then hold them. Brevity in these moments is not coldness. It is dignity. Practice. 3. Make time for yourself. Non-negotiable. Look at your schedule for this week, not your work calendar, your actual life, the full picture of where your time goes. How much of it is reserved for yourself? Not for recovery from exhaustion, not for decompressing from obligations, but genuinely for the things that feed you, that restore your curiosity, your energy, your sense of being a person with an interior life that matters. If the answer is close to nothing, you are looking at a significant self-respect problem. Not because you are lazy or careless, but because somewhere the message took hold that your needs are less important than your usefulness to others. Begin treating time for yourself not as a luxury you earn when everything else is done, but as a baseline requirement, as essential to your functioning as sleep. Practice 4. Introduce a pause between trigger and response. When someone disrespects you, 2 unhealthy defaults tend to emerge. You explode, which alienates and invites escalation, or you collapse into silence, swallowing something that should have been said. Neither is healthy. Neither is effective. Between the stimulus and your response, there is a space. Practice inhabiting that space. Breathe into it. And from that place of relative calm, speak clearly. The way you just spoke to me is not something I'm willing to accept. I'm going to need us to have this conversation differently. That crossed a line for me. There is no shame in naming what is happening. There is only clarity. And clarity, spoken without aggression, is one of the most powerful things a person can offer, both to themselves and to the people around them. Practice 5. Choose your environment. Intentionally. Look at the people who populate your daily life, not their titles or how long you have known them or how the friendship once felt. Look at how you feel after spending time with them. Are there people in your life who genuinely see you? Who remember what you shared with them? Who check in, not because they need something, but because they value your presence? Who challenge you with honesty while treating you with care? And conversely, are there people you continue to maintain contact with almost entirely out of habit, obligation, or the fear of the awkwardness that would follow if you stopped? You are allowed to choose who occupies the limited resource of your time and attention, not with cruelty or drama, but with the quiet, steady intention of someone who takes their own well-being seriously. The people who genuinely value you will remain when you begin operating from this place. Those who relied on your limitlessness to enable their own taking will become distant. Let them. These 5 practices are not complicated. They are not revolutionary in theory. What makes them difficult is this. They require you to act differently from decades of emotional habit. Habits built on the need for approval, the terror of rejection, the belief that love must be earned rather than received. And now, the closing truth, the one this entire conversation has been building toward. Stop waiting for other people to change. Stop waiting for them to finally see you, to recognize what they have in front of them, to spontaneously decide to offer you the regard you have been quietly hoping for. The world is not blind to you. It is watching you. It is watching how you walk, how you speak, what you accept, what you refuse, what you ask for, and what you silently endure. You want to be heard, but you silence yourself. You want to be valued, but you accept scraps. You want to be chosen, but you always put yourself last. And then you wonder why you keep being overlooked. The answer is difficult, and it is honest, because you are not seeing yourself. Carl Jung wrote, "Until the unconscious is made conscious, it governs our lives as destiny." The disrespect, the wounding relationships, the cycles that repeat themselves, none of this is coincidence. All of it is a reflection of your internal relationship with yourself. The outer world changes when the inner world changes. To be respected, you do not need to become cold or hard or guarded. You simply need to stop begging, stop contorting yourself into acceptability, stop abandoning your own experience to maintain someone else's comfort. And most importantly of all, make peace with the idea of being alone, because the person who has made peace with solitude is the freest person in any room. They are not performing. They are not angling for approval. They are simply present. And that presence carries a quiet authority that no amount of people-pleasing will ever generate. When someone violates your limits, you have two paths. You can stay silent and repeat the story, or you can speak and rewrite it. You do not need to be aggressive. You only need to be true to yourself. Because when you genuinely respect yourself, when the change happens not in your words, but in your energy, your posture, the way you hold yourself in the world, you will not need to demand respect. It will simply be there. If this conversation has stirred something in you, if it has brought into focus truths you have been circling without quite facing, then you are ready for the next step. Go deeper, because you deserve to reconnect with yourself.